Welcome to Cardio Insights, the podcast where we explore how digital solutions are transforming cardiovascular and emergency medicine. Featuring thought leaders from leading institutions across the globe, this series of conversations unveils the power behind clinical algorithms and decision support tools, and how they are changing the way we diagnose and manage cardiac conditions. From their impact on clinical practice, their benefits for patient outcomes, and the challenges they pose to health systems in terms of implementation and regulation, this podcast is intended as a precious resource for healthcare professionals in cardiology and emergency medicine who are curious to learn more about this exciting field. I'm your host, Matthew Chaffert, and you are listening to Cardio Insights. So welcome, Paul, to this episode of Cardio Insights, the podcast where we explore how digital solutions are transforming cardiovascular and emergency medicine. For our listeners who might be new to you, you are an access evidence leader here at Roche Diagnostics with a background in public health, management, and health policy science, spanning academia and the industry. So in this role, you're leading the development of payers-relevant deliverables, such as health economic models, to support reimbursement requests and price negotiations for Roche Diagnostics, and to ultimately advance patients' access to our solutions. So in this episode, we want to explore with you how implementing digital decision-making algorithms in cardiology and emergency medicine can lead to significant benefits for healthcare systems, including cost savings, resource optimization, and increased care quality. The goal for our listeners is to understand, the role that evidence generation plays in that regard, the methods that are used to generate this evidence, and how it contributes to driving the adoption of these tools in clinical practice. So if we start with the potential benefits that these digital decision-making algorithms can bring to hospitals and health systems, can you share with us to what extent these tools can be beneficial and the areas where we can expect improvements if they were to be adopted and used?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the great question, Matthew. I would say there are for these algorithms two value that may be, let's say, drivers. The first one is the workflow optimization, meaning achieving a desired outcome for a patient in a more efficient way, which means, for example, if you go through the ED, would be achieving the accurate diagnosis with less unnecessary procedures, lab tests, or additional examination. It comes also to the point of the, let's say, healthcare professionals' time, meaning optimizing the time that these healthcare professionals spend with patients and resources so that it can be dispatched to other patients or other situations. Apart from, let's say, the workflow optimization, there is also the possibility offered by these algorithms to improve patient outcomes, meaning that patients will get an optimized course of action or management, might be facing less adverse events or less complications based on this decision, leading to cost savings. I would say today one of the major examples we could mention is the use of the triage algorithms, digital algos in the ED, for example. Yes, emergency department. One of the, let's say, more common cases would be for patients presenting at the emergency department with a chest pain. And for that, there are a few algorithms available. What they do is that they will, based on the data parameters of the patients, assess the risk for several, let's say, disease or events with critical outcomes. And based on that, we'll derive the level of acuity of these patients and the level of medical attentions that could be needed for these patients. And interestingly is that how it plays in practice, usually if you compare how these algorithms work compared to standard procedures, usually these algorithms will classify more patients as being with low acuity, meaning that they might need a lower level of attention and lower resources, so that based on this algorithm, you can shift the medical attention and the medical resources also to patients with the higher needs. How does it translate from, let's say, the operational perspective going through the emergency department? It means that these patients might have a shorter length of stay through the emergency department, but also for patients needing more medical attentions, the transition from the emergency department to the inpatient units might be shorter, leading to a shorter interventions also for these patients, and ultimately potential cost savings because these patients are treated earlier, and turnover in the emergency department helps to manage more patients over the same, let's say, period or amount of time.
Understood. So there's let's say at an individual hospital level, there are time savings for healthcare professionals in terms of, efficiency of their daily, optimizing their daily tasks. There is the optimization of what we say or what we call care utilization in a way. So like hospital bed capacity, which ultimately has, an impact on costs. If we look at, let's say, at a higher level, considering like a health system, like, a country or multiple countries, what are the benefits that, based on your experience and the work you've done, that you see also at a higher level? What does, or it kind of like put differently, if we kind of like sum up all these individual benefits that we see in each hospitals, what does it change at a health system level?
Yeah, great question. I think what we just touched upon is exactly at the level of, let's say, a single hospital or a healthcare facility. I think that the first aspect would be if you, let's say, spread or develop or, let's say, implement these kinds of algorithms across your healthcare system, you might see this benefit multiplied by the number of, let's say, facilities, let's say, widespread. But the second one is, and something very important, is that these algorithms, digital algorithms, they can also provide medical care standardization. And you avoid, let's say, medical practice variations across your healthcare system, leading to a very consistent quality of care, which can be very important at the, let's say, at the size of a healthcare system. A third one that is a bit more, let's say, forward-looking is that implementing these digital algorithms provides some insights for these patients. Brought up together, you can derive also, let's say, insights at the size of a population. And you can forecast, let's say, future events or derive also interventions at the size of the population based on these insights that you've collected through the algorithms that can impact, let's say, the whole healthcare system and the larger population per se.
So yeah, the scale of the benefits is just getting bigger.
Yeah.
What are the considerations to account for in demonstrating the benefits of these digital solutions, have, at a hospital level or at a health system level, toward the stakeholders within those systems? Meaning, what are the types of methods that are used to generate this evidence, the types of studies? I think it's quite a fascinating field, and it's a complex field as well. So if you can, take us through, let's say, the basics of that.
Yeah, sure. I think, first of all, what is very important is that when we work also on diagnostics, we have a sequence of events, which is, let's say, the decision-making, the decision that has to be made by the healthcare professional, then the intervention, and the outcomes of the intervention. And you have to be able to chain these three steps, the decision, the intervention, and the outcome, and show that for a new algorithm, for example, you have better outcomes than when the same decision is based on the, let's say, standard of care or standard procedures. Usually this evidence comes from the clinical trials. And let's say this is the prerequisite for a demonstration to your payers that you have to show a positive impact on clinical outcomes. Yeah. Then when it comes to the type of evidence, it really depends on the audience you're trying to address, because to different audiences, different requirements, be it in terms of cost that are covered, the populations that is included in the intervention that is covered by your algorithm, or for example, the time horizon. What we see usually is that if you were to talk to hospital CFO, that would be really interested into, let's say, efficiency of procedures in the hospital, like a workflow optimization study would be a very good fit to see how you have efficiency gains with your new solutions compared to the standard of care. And this can be translated, of course, in cost savings ultimately. When you're talking, for example, if your audience is a national payer, they might be interested more into, let's say, the impact of the intervention at a larger, let's say, at a larger magnitude. What we would be using usually in this case is, for example, a budget impact model that will help payers or the audience to understand, can I afford to implement this new intervention? Meaning that you take into considerations the new intervention and the cost associated to that. And you try to demonstrate that your new intervention will lead to cost savings. Some of the payers might be interested into what we call cost effectiveness model, that are more long-term models showing the long-term evolution of these patients. They usually rely on what we call utility or let's say cost effectiveness data, and are much more targeted when the question for the payers or for the audience is this intervention good value for money? So you can see there are different types of evidence. There is not a one way forward, but it's more to be, let's say, decided upon the needs or the requirements of the audience that you're trying to address. What point I would like to bring is that, especially when it comes to diagnostic solutions, they always fit within a very particular healthcare organization. There are large variations in terms of medical practices and care organizations across geographies. So a step that is also very important when you work on the value demonstration and the economic demonstrations of these solutions is actually to generate, to engage into pilot activities and generate real-world evidence to convince the local stakeholders of the value of the solution in this given environment.
And to that point, so there is an aspect of generating local evidence to convince, let's say, stakeholders at the local level, and then there are these bigger assessments you talked about, budget impact models, cost effectiveness simulations or models, obviously clinical evidence like clinical trials. So I guess probably part of your work is to figure out as well what is the correct mix that we need to have in order to support reimbursement decisions that, as we know, are kind of like the ultimate lever or leverage to unlock, let's say, access to a certain solution. Because I guess before there is any reimbursement for it, it's hard to drive any or a significant level of adoption, I would say. Yeah, definitely.
And what we're trying to take also in consideration, working at the global level, is the requirements and needs of affiliates, because they are the one engaging into these activities. Exactly. So the way we try to develop our deliverables is to make them adaptable and try to hand them, let's say, early on to affiliates, so that they have time also to tailor to their needs and populate in the appropriate way for the local value demonstration.
I see. There's a question we ask, kind of like a fantasy question we ask at the end of each episode we've recorded so far. If you had a magic wand, what would be one digital health solution you would like to see, in health systems or hospitals, based on your experience, also your and your interest in the field?
Yeah, great questions. I think what I'm really interested in at the moment is the concept of digital twin. Really excited about this. Very shortly, it's let's say digital twin is basically creating a simulation of, for example, a patient or an organ that mimics very, very precisely, let's say, the patient or the organ. It's derived, it's based on the information from the medical history of the patients or, for example, imaging. And it's also informed in, let's say, in real time by using sensors on your patients. What's super interesting with this digital twin is that it has several applications, because once you have defined the parameters of your patient, you can compare it and match it against evidence. And let's say, for example, for a patient, it could be deciding or forecasting the, let's say, the course of a disease and deciding potentially on early intervention to prevent a risk or early treatment. It could be also from, let's say, the research perspective, using this digital twin to explore the effect of potential treatment or interventions and decide on the most appropriate for your patient, really going into the direction of the personalized medicine. There is also, let's say, I think an aspect that can be about the healthcare resource use and planification is that you're able to forecast maybe demands based on these insights and generate insights on workflow and, for example, how to forecast your, let's say, healthcare resources given a situation, for example, epidemics or let's say specific patients' profiles. So there are many applications that are that could be possible with the digital twin. It's still, I mean, there are challenges, of course, because it requires a lot of computational power to be able to create this digital twin. There are also, of course, considerations about like ethics and privacy. Yeah, I think it could be really a game changer to gain access and to widespread these digital twins.
And I think it loops back as well nicely on the topic we discussed today with evidence, because there's probably also a world in the future where we are able also to generate, evidence out of synthetic data. I think we're not really there yet, but maybe that's something for the future.
Yeah, you touched on a very good point. I think we could definitely accelerate time to market also using this synthetic data and being able to generate hypotheses and confirm them much faster. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Paul. I think it's a fascinating field. I think it gives a good overview of the type of evidence, the things that you work with, and the criticality of it to unlock reimbursement and drive adoption of these new tools. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks, Mathieu, for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Cardio Insights. We hope you enjoyed it. If you want to dive further into other aspects of digital solutions in cardiovascular and emergency medicine, check out the other episodes of the series. To support the show, you could share this episode with your surroundings and leave a 5-star review on your preferred streaming platform. Cardio Insights is a podcast brought to you by Roche. Thank you for your time and see you in the next one.